From Grooveview Studios in Columbus, Ohio, this is Getting the Brand Back Together, a podcast exploring the interdisciplinary art of banding, branding, and business building. Rock and roll relic, poet, writer, and brandist. I'm your host, Brad Sergoni. Today, we're joined by James Rores, the founder and CEO of the Floriss Group. Welcome to the show, James.
Great pleasure to be here, Brad. Thank you.
It is. It's great to sit down and talk with you in this atmosphere. I know we've done podcasts together, not on getting the brand back together, but we've done it for some mutual clients and associates.
Right. So many performances
yes.
over the years. Yeah.
Yes. So it's good to talk face to face. So I just want our listeners to know that the gentleman that we're talking to today about getting the brand back together, our organizations have done a number of projects together over the last decade. And James has a plethora of leadership, business, and sales strategy business growth knowledge that I want to tap into today. And that comes from 10,000 working sessions, 100 industries, one man. One man with three brains. And this idea of leadership and sales and branding and marketing operations, and thinking about the trilogy of that, because while James is coaching and mentoring leaders and their sales management teams on what we're calling this idea of a perpetual growth curve, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, our company is a complement to that in that we do branding. So oftentimes, I will refer companies that I'm working with to the Floriss Group, and reversely, James and his team will refer companies that maybe aren't mature enough in branding, and you see a gap there, and we help each other on behalf of our clients do those things.
It's a great hand up. It's great to have a band member that I can count on.
Yeah, well said. And so today, one of the things I want to talk about was a piece in Harvard Business Review. We're just going to use this as an academic springboard. And they were talking about this idea of leadership brand, which you and I have been living together for almost a decade. And what that means and how they connect. And first of all, the things I want to talk about that are in your brain and my brain is this idea of leadership, this idea of sales, and this idea of brand.
Right.
And how they sit in this operational organism we call business growth or business building.
Right.
Can you tell me, when you think about these things, whether you're doing it from a sales growth projection or you're doing just high-end leadership consulting, how do you talk to businesses about those three assets, leadership, sales, and branding, and how they work together?
Right. I mean, it's a wonderful conversation because it's a holistic conversation, right? We talk about practicing sales as a leadership competency. As a salesperson, a good salesperson is someone who knows what they stand for, right? They approach the conversation in a way to drive mutual growth, mutual benefit, right? It's not a zero-sum game. So I have to know what I stand for. I have to also understand the characteristics and qualities of the person that I'm here to serve so I can qualify them for the shared goal, so I can walk them down a shared path. So what branding does is it lets me as an employee of a company that I didn't found understand who I am, why I'm here, what I stand for, who my ideal, or what we call an always buyer, an always customer, what characteristics they have. How do I talk to them? How do I help them understand that I do know them very well, and I can actually help them complete their sentences because I know them so well? That all comes from the wisdom that is collected over the years within the mindset and the knowledge base of the company. And it's expressed in an effective way by the people who run the brand and who run marketing. It's very strategic. And that voice is given then to every employee, every salesperson, every leader, so that connection with the market can be made.
Right. And when we talk about leadership brand, one of the things they bring up is this idea of reverse designing a brand. And that's why the Harvard Business Review article sparked my interest. And they have a statement in there that says what they want to be known for by the customer, and then linking back. Think about how many brands don't know what they want to be known for.
Right.
So what they mean is, what impression is Harley Davidson leaving on me? What impression is Amazon leaving on me? What impression is Hallmark leaving on me? How do I feel about pre-pandemic? How do I feel about Zoom now coming out of a pandemic? My emotions have changed about this brand. And I love this idea about linking back. So that phrase from Lexus, the constant pursuit of perfection, that comes from the customer. That's what the brand wants the customer to feel. And when you and I talk about these subjects, we talk about humanizing. And that's what you wrote me back when we were talking about this topic today. It's so important to humanize the brand through humble leaders. Humanizing the brand through a humble leader. You use the term servant leadership all the time. And I now notice that you are calling associates, employees, stakeholders, investors, volunteers.
Right.
Which I love that you're using that term. And I think I understand why. But as we get in this conversation about humanizing brands, humble leaders, and listening to the customer, let the customer democratize and write the brand for you. That's the perfect messaging. Don't invent it. So my question would be this to you. First, how do you humanize leadership in CEOs or let's just say a leadership team? And then second, tell us in humanizing leadership, I guess what I'm really interested in is this other idea of why are you using that phrase volunteers when you talk about associates and stakeholders?
Right. Wow. Now, dude, if I was training you to be a great salesperson, I would suggest you ask one question at a time.
Okay. So humanize for me leadership. Thank you.
Humanize leadership. There we go. So I have a definition of what three definitions or characteristics of a great leader. One of the definitions is that a great leader has core values that are humanizing. A poor leader, and if we weren't here, I'd use different expletives to describe the kind of leader that I'm talking about, has core values that dehumanize. So sometimes it's easy to understand for our primitive brains to just create contrast. I include myself in there as well.
Yeah.
If you want to know what humanizing is, imagine what dehumanizing behavior or core values are.
Right.
So, we can talk about that. I mean, we see it in politics. We see it in business. We see it in all the controversies in the news. Behaviors and core values that are humanizing versus behaviors and core values that are dehumanizing. The question is, how do you want to show up as a leader? For example, are you confused by the profit motive and the humanizing motive?
Okay, hold on. That's a brilliant statement. Are you confused by profit, the monetization, or the human moment?
Yeah.
And by confused, you mean blinded to the human because of the profit, or the other one?
Exactly.
Right?
If you're confused, then you're by definition someone who needs some work. All right. Again, I could use other expletives.
I know, but I love the way I know. That's beautiful. And it's a Friday, and you do let it go on Fridays usually, but I've got you in the AM hours.
Mondays, Tuesdays, Sundays, Saturdays. Yeah, that's a big deal for us to be thinking about.
Okay, that's a great point. All right, and then my second question is, tell me about why you have selected, because I know etymologically, you and I talk about branded language and how important it is to those you serve. When you have this word, volunteers, why did you use that for stakeholders, employees, and associates?
Yeah. I'm going to give a plug to an author, James Hunter, who wrote a very simple book on servant leadership. And it was the one that, I bought volumes and volumes on servant leadership. And so at the end of the day, you don't have to go full academic, mode. You can read a book like The Servant by James Hunter. It's a parable. It's a story. But one of the most powerful things that he mentioned there is that people who follow, right, we have to treat them as volunteers, people that have a choice. And that connected really well with what I believe to be true about earning the right to ask, earning the right to lead. By thinking about earning that, I put that on myself. What am I doing to create the connection, to bring value to somebody? There are a lot of leaders out there who manipulate, who force, right? And I'll give you a great example. When I was growing up as a kid, my dad sold insurance. So I'm a fourth generation in the restaurant biz. My dad left the family biz.
I just want to tell everybody, a restaurant biz near Buffalo, upstate New York, right? Buffalo.
Right, Buffalo, yeah.
Yeah, so all I have to say is he knows how to make a chicken wing.
I'm much better eating, but I'm definitely a connoisseur, my man. Definitely a connoisseur.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Love the hot sauce. But the bottom line is here, Greek, think about it, Greek, greasy spoons, all that stuff, four generations. And my brother's carrying on the tradition. But he was in the insurance business. He was being trained by Allstate when I was being born. But back in the day, so he's in the 60s, right? Back in the day, how did they manage sales organizations? They hired you young. They wanted you to get married. They expected you to buy a car you couldn't afford and buy a house you couldn't afford right away. Why? Because they wanted you coming to work hungry, in debt, so that you had no choice but to make money.
With a tight belt.
Yeah, it's like that is like the ultimate effed up experience.
Right.
And it's
well, so that's backwards to humanizing.
It's and think about the experience that people have now when they deal with those kinds of salespeople. Those salespeople are led by people who are dehumanizing them. What do they do to their customers? Why do we think salespeople in the sales profession sucks? Because they make us
de-evolutionize.
And they essentially dehumanize the buyer.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? So, Brad, now you go do something with that as a branding guy, right? You write a brand that exalts the company.
Yeah.
And then go have it delivered by people who dehumanize the buyer. Hey,
hold on a second. You and I have done this together. We can't name any names, but we've had this, right? The brand's beautiful. The sales are beautiful. All of that is great. But it's handed off to either ignorance is easy to fix. That's just through education. But a dehumanizing attitude sometimes is unfixable, right? It's the unfixable fix.
But I'll tell you what though, brother. Every human being on the planet that is leveraging or using dehumanizing principles and practices would feel better about themselves, about their job, about their life, about their future, about whether they could be happy or not if they knew how to get what their employers wanted.
Without doing that.
Without being manipulative.
Right.
So all we really have to do is teach them. And it starts with leadership. Do the leaders of your organization recognize that they can have both growth and an authentic approach to how they treat people and their customers?
That's a great point. And tell me on this, let's stay on this track of humanizing. Do you think it's more difficult this is interesting, I'm toggling this around in my own brain right now. Is it more difficult for a B2B to understand humanizing leadership than it is a B2C? Because the B2C is closer to the customer?
In reality, in my opinion, my experience, there is no difference.
Okay. I agree with you.
Because the buyer is a human being in and of themselves.
Right.
And you and I have talked about this. Brand, in a sales context, a stronger brand shortens the buying cycle.
That's right.
Right? So there's a connection between that human being and the brand and what it means to them. If the brand is strong, you're going to shorten the buying cycle.
Exactly.
You're not going to minimize the requirement for successful leadership, for that salesperson to lead them to a successful buying decision. But the brand does have an impact in both cases, regardless. The challenge, however, is that for both organizations, B2B and B2C, when the company and its leaders rely too heavily on its product to differentiate, then they lose sight of the potential for their people to differentiate. So I love, you have a great brand, right? You drive a Beamer, you drive a Mercedes, whatever the hell it is, and you go to the dealership and you have a piss poor relationship, right? Why?
This sounds like this has happened to you.
What gives you that idea, man? No, but think about it. I mean, you have a crappy relationship. or experience, and now you have to love the brand in spite of that. What if organizations invested as much in developing their people as they did in developing their products, and really added the experience to the calculus of that brand?
Perfectly said. And the answer to your question is brands like Disney. Right.
Well
and
done. Yeah.
Right. So that's who does that.
Or think about Apple, though. When you go to an Apple store and you're dying for this person to start selling you something, and they're like, they could give a shit. They're like, I'm just here to help, man.
Right.
Like you're
well, because their culture is on human empowerment. Their culture is based on human empowerment, not pushy salesmanship.
And I'll tell you what, though, their culture, though, in my view, the words, I agree with you, everything you said. In my view, I'd add, their culture is also based on differentiation.
Yes.
They want to be different than the experience you have buying a consumer electronic item anywhere else.
Yes.
So they're going to be the typical consumer electronic experience.
Yes, yes. And it is based solely on differentiation. You are correct. I have seen live sales moments with Apple where a customer is upset and complaining. And I'll tell you, the one thing that Apple does a very good job at is never buying into that emotional hysteria. And Apple did a very calm job happening live with a customer near me. I didn't know her, but she was upset about something. And all they kept saying was, we're going to take care of this. We're going to, right? And they did a wonderful job of empowering them that no matter what the answer is, we're going to do this together. Right. And again, that's humanizing.
I think of our local, Cameron Mitchell restaurant. The answer is yes.
Yes, right.
The answer is yes.
Right. And that's exactly what they were doing. So, okay, so you've now talked about the importance of humanizing, and we've gone over a little bit about empathy. And the other thing that you and I have talked about these things coming, we call them branded cultural organizations. And what does it mean to create a cultural organization from the inside out?
Yeah.
Some of the things that you and I talked about is sometimes leaderships are built from the outside in, right? And that I know that you personally do is you you start to build leadership from the inside out, right? And the outside in. I know both are important to you, but I want you to talk about that internal balance versus that external balance. And do you accomplish these things one right after another? Or do you work on inside first or outside first? How's that work for you from a leadership standpoint?
So when we think about organizational development, we think about leaders first, then we think about teams, then we think about culture, and then we think about customer. So, and it's not because I'm prioritizing importance in a kind of like a generic
That's just the
way.
ecosystem.
Just think about how you're going to develop an organization. Now, think about a band versus a company. A band might have 5 members. Company might have 500,000 or 5,000 or 50. The point is, you're just developing a bigger brand, a bigger band. What does that band need? It needs leadership. Why? The leader sets the vision. The leader defines the reason why we're here. The leader brings their core values. So the leader does all the things that set the stage. Then what the leader does is build a team. Now, again, we're getting into this concept of servant leadership. The easiest way to understand servant leadership is that we serve a shared goal and we lead others down a shared path to that goal. Notice the word shared. If I'm leading you, it's important that I'm taking you to a place that I can take you or that I want to take you. I can't sell ketchup to a woman with white gloves, right? This idea that we can sell anything to anybody is bullshit. Right. You can manipulate people, yeah.
Right.
But what we have to have is
or bully.
Before I can sell you something, I want to make sure that what you seek is something that I can deliver. If so, then we have a shared goal. Same thing when you're building a team. Why on earth would I bring someone on my team who didn't share my vision? It's going to make my job as a leader that much more difficult, or who didn't have the skills, et cetera, or couldn't learn the skills, et cetera. So the idea is the leader sets the stage, then we build a team that's aligned, shared goal. So I as a leader can walk them down a shared path. And so they can step up and walk me down the shared path. Now we're co-leading, we're co-creating. Then comes culture. Leader, team. Culture, like brand, is not what we say it is. It's what people experience, which is what got you back to Lexus and Apple in our conversations. I can say something, and if I don't deliver, then what?
Right.
Right? The client knows. The employees know. So the brand is the brand like culture is built on the experience that everyone has as they work together. And that comes down to ultimately the responsibility of that leader, which is why leaders are the first thing that change when we want to shift an organization's performance, how they operate, how they think, all that stuff.
That last point you just made is profound. Obviously, in everything from rock and roll bands to politics, that is true. And you're right, change is at the top. And the things that you just talked about were inward facing, which I love that, right? We didn't talk about any of the public relations of any of that. You're just talking about the insides of the anatomy of a brand and a corporate culture and team and this idea of share. So bringing it back to the band question, in your years of concert going or performances, what's the lasting performance?
Yeah. Well, you asked me for my last favorite before we talked. And, I remember being at a Rolling Stones concert with other gray, decrepit human beings, right? Because we're all old fans.
Yeah.
It smells like weed, but and we're on the floor, outdoors in Toronto, and we're watching that was one experience.
Is that where you saw them though, Toronto?
That was one of the places I saw the Stones, the last place I saw them. And it was the last tour, right?
Yeah, it's always the last. Over 50.
Last tour.
Yeah. Until you're 81, it's always the last.
Right. I just thought about, then we had an experience, Whitesnake.
Wow.
In Boston, in a small venue.
Probably unbelievable.
With some dear friends. Now, everybody there was old, but they all had black tight leather on, baby. It was badass, right? It was totally cool. And it was dark and it was indoors. That was pretty cool. I think I told you my favorite was my first.
Mm-hmm. Your favorite concert was your first concert.
And it's really interesting because it was in high school with a bunch of friends I don't even talk to anymore. Great people, but we just grew apart.
Right.
It was Journey.
Of course it was.
And like everybody had, we all were coupled up and it was like this high school experience. And what was really funny is we got any ticket that we could. So we were actually sitting behind the stage to the side.
Oh.
And they did us a favor of having these gigantic speakers pointed right in our faces.
Right.
But it was, it was just Journey. It was the environment. It was who we were there with. It was high school. It was the first, time, and the music was badass. And,
right.
And when you look back at it from here, you recognize the history that you were experiencing. Yeah.
That was more than you could even imagine at that age.
You could never have appreciated that age.
Right.
Same thing with, I think fondly of seeing Genesis.
Yeah.
Peter Gabriel in concert. Same kind of thing that you can't replicate those experiences anymore.
Those are great answers. So let's talk about leadership in that. So Gabriel as a leader, right? I mean, that's how the band split up and he did his own thing and carried on, which is a hard thing to do.
Right.
And then if you look at Journey, I think one of the greatest rock vocalists, certainly ballad rock vocalist, the greatest ballad rock vocalist is Steve Perry.
That's exactly right.
Right. So those are, to your points, internal leaders who share visions and values and inspire their audience, their bandmates to come along. True?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's like, this is so, I'm getting tingly because yes, I'm a leadership and sales geek. Ask me what I do for fun. This is what I do for fun.
Right.
But the reason I'm getting excited about this is, going back to your point about the customer, right? Lexus has to know what customer they want and what customer they don't want. Apple has to know what customer they want and don't want. When we sit down with companies, we help them define not their ideal customer profile, the ICP. It's the always customer profile.
And give our listeners an idea of the difference in your mind between the ideal customer profile and an always customer profile.
Ideal customer is valuable, yes, but it's defining kind of like who your company is designed to serve, right? That ICP. The always customer profile is the customer that now this is sales is a game of probability, right? So always meaning probability, right? But 90% of the time, when you meet this person at this point in their lives, they will buy from you, always buy from you, or nearly always buy from you. Same thing with, so it's just a different way of looking at how well you understand not just the demographics and psychographics of who you're selling to or trying to serve, but you're understanding the situation, you're understanding everything about what goes into them making that buying decision. Now, compare that to the bands.
It's the same thing
they did, dude. I mean, when you watch interviews of band leaders from AC/DC to Zeppelin to the Stones to Beatles, whoever the hell you're listening to, they were always talking about, how do I differentiate myself?
Yes.
And you look at the machinations that the Stones went through as they were competing against.
Well, they were the Beatles in the beginning. They were both wearing suits.
They had to friggin' decide who their customer was going to be, and then they had to go serve them.
That is exactly correct. Who their customer is going to be and going to serve, which brings us back to that first point about what is it that you want the customer to feel, right? So some rock and roll offerings or music offerings get you lost in feelings of partying. Other ones, good country song, a form of generational reflection.
Right.
Some tunes, some bands, just a joyful moment, right? You said that when you went and saw Journey, I think the phrase you used with each one of us were paired off. And what you're saying is we're waiting for the ballads because that's what they're, right?
Yeah, it was an experience that you could not replicate anywhere else on the planet.
To your always customer. And one thing, I had Dr. Blackwell on the podcast, and he talks about fans, from the word fanatical, are customers of brands.
Right.
Right? If they happen, and he's written many books on this, if they happen to be a band, or it happens to be Goodyear Tire, or it happens to be HelloFresh, it doesn't matter. That customer is the ecosystem heartbeat of that brand. The phrase I want to talk to you about now, because I know this is a big button of yours, and I'm going to add an adjective in front of it. Being a brand guy, I like my adjectives. But you talk about, not only do we want this inward value system, cultural value system in leadership, we also need, as you're talking about customers and fans, this idea of engagement from our volunteers, right? Your employees, your stakeholders. How do you get them engaged?
Oh my God.
Keeping a band after they've had a number of hits, I certainly didn't experience this, but getting a band with that many hits, it's hard to keep the band, your volunteers, engaged.
Yeah.
How do you keep leaders engaged, and more importantly, the volunteers, the investors, the customers, the employees, all of those people engaged?
Yeah, so there's a series of ways you do this, but the first most important, the one that trumps them all, is this concept of fit.
Okay.
Fit. So I have people come to me oftentimes saying, hey, Jimmy, I'm looking for a new job, a new experience. I say to them, great. What do you want to do? What would turn you on? What would get you up out of bed? It's like, I don't know. I understand supply chain. Put me wherever you want me. It's like bullshit, right? I tell them, go back to work. The point is, if you don't know what turns you on and all you're doing is being a journeyman,
there's no fit,
looking for someone to put you to work, then you're only ever going to be a fraction of who you could be. You're only going to achieve a fraction of your potential. You're going to be a mediocre or high mediocre performer at best in my organization. Same thing if you buy something from me and the fit isn't ideal. You're not going to be a raving fan. You might use it and say, hey, this is cool. You might not call me to bitch and complain about it, which might be all I care about if I'm a crappy customer, if I'm a crappy company.
Right.
But you're not going to be somebody who brings 75 other customers to my door. So it's really about this idea of fit. So the only way you understand fit is to know who you are first. We talk about a 100% predictable growth curve. How do we do that? Well, you have to understand what is the combination of elements that optimize the predictability of your success. So think about hiring somebody for a team. How well defined is the role that you're going to put them in? Right? Have you gone to Indeed and just copied somebody else's job description, changed a few words?
Or did you really think about this?
Right. So it's this idea of how serious, as a leader and as a manager, do we take this idea that I'm actually going to pull somebody out of their career, add a change to their resume, bring them into my company, and no big deal. If they don't work out, we'll just get rid of them and replace them. Well, you know what? Fuck you. Pardon my French. You're disrupting someone's life.
Yes.
And your
selling your brand
your
short.
metric of friggin' success is, don't worry, if they don't work out, we can replace them. Customer isn't happy with you, don't worry, don't sweat it, we can replace them. Bullshit. Right. And I'll tell you what, if you want to know why your company is so amazing and so small, it's because you're missing the humanistic side. You're missing the connection.
Yes.
You're not investing enough. I could have this conversation in a podcast that I would design. It'd be boring as hell. Here I am on your friggin' podcast, and I'm like a kid in a candy shop, right? My message is going to resonate differently because it's wrapped in your brand.
Right.
I can be great and be poor.
I understand.
Very easily, brother. So it's like we cannot just focus on products and services. We have to focus on the whole package, and you have to respect the relationship, the fit you're going to have with the people on your team and the people that you serve, your customers.
And I love that you use the word connection, because the adjective I was going to use in front of the word engagement is emotional engagement. You and I always talk about suspend the brain to capture the heart, right? It's you can't overthink it and productize just to monetize. Right. Where's the humanize in that? Right. And that's the beauty. There's all the equity is in what I call that emotional engagement. The equity for, in your case, I'll go back to your scenario, to the customer. Brands who do this kind of emotional engagement are better. It's not only to the customer, but it is also to the associates and to the brand itself, right? Yeah. All of those things have to be that human E of emotional engagement all the time.
Yeah. Brad, and I'm getting passionate about this, but I'm a recovering asshole, okay? So I want everybody to know that I'm not preaching from a pulpit saying, look, be perfect, be like me. I'm not. I'm only passionate about this because I was the other guy. I grew up in the 80s, man. It was like Gordon Gekko.
I know.
Who didn't want to be Gordon Gekko?
I know.
Who I hung out with. It was the leverage buyout. It was buy a company,
flip and rip.
It was like
flip and rip.
All those, that ethos is what I grabbed onto. And I spent the first 15 years of my career practicing dehumanizing behavior until I realized it was unsustainable. And then,
all right, well, this is why I love talking to you. I have a question all set up, but what you've just now triggered in me, then you would say, from what you just said, that one of the most important things a leader can have, and therefore an organization can have, is vulnerability.
Right.
Because what you're doing and what you're even saying is being vulnerable as hell. Right?
Yeah.
And what does vulnerability do to companies when they're vulnerable?
Well, it's like Apple. That the person on the phone isn't trying to prove to you that you're wrong or prove to them. They're not looking for a fight. They're not getting defensive. They recognize that we are human beings. We are flawed.
Right.
And they also recognize it doesn't matter you can be right, but you can't be rich at the same time, right? You've got to be willing to be wrong to recognize that's how we grow. So it's this idea of transparency. So any leader who isn't transparent, who hides stuff, right? Any leader who isn't authentic, their true self. Any leader who isn't vulnerable. And then this idea of accountability. Also, any leader doesn't hold themselves accountable. If you can't do those four things, then you can't be honest. You can't live in integrity, and you're not going to be attractive to a volunteer who wants to operate at their highest level of potential.
Right.
You're only going to be able to build a mediocre team, which is why there's a lot of underperforming companies out there that have great products and services.
Yes, yes. So tell me, in leadership, let's say that the leader has those 4 pillars that you just discussed.
Yeah.
How is this amplified harmoniously?
Mm-hmm.
How is this amplified in a sales organization as a leader? How do you amplify that?
Yeah. So I told you that after about 15 years pursuing that money, I realized it wasn't scalable, and I hired a life coach and became functional within 6 months, but I kept that coach for about 10 years because I was really interested in studying this. The issue is, we can show up and be curious and ask good questions. We can then get the answers that we seek. What do we do with them? Most of us just are kind of like, we use it for entertainment. Good answer, and they move on. We create a meme or send a meme or whatever, and we don't do anything with it. We have to apply it. So the formula that I use is D plus A equals O. The decisions we make plus the actions we take equal the outcomes we create. It's really basic and simple, but there's so many people out there that gather information and don't do anything with it.
Oh, it's true.
So if in the context of a sales organization, why don't we collect the data that we know is going to be most predictive of our success? Why don't we compare what we know about creating a predictable path to success to how we're operating today? That means I have to be transparent and vulnerable. Shit. That means I have to be interested in being authentic and recognize the power of that. And then it means I also have to hold myself accountable.
Right.
That's really hard for a lot of human beings to do.
Yeah.
Especially people who are attached to this idea of being awesome all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about collecting data and being committed to doing the analysis and then doing something about it. Make the decision, take the action, and create the outcome that you seek.
Right.
Don't just sit there and wish for it, and don't sit there as a leader and bitch and complain when your people can't get there.
Right.
If you've got an underperforming team, guess what? That team has an underperforming leader. Now, you can either bitch and complain about it, or you can quit your job, or you can do something about it.
Right.
Seek the insight and the information, the guidance, and then do something with it and elevate yourself and elevate the people around you.
What you just described is exactly what components of a brand must do too. It's not only true in leadership in an organization, but when I'm organizing assets for a brand or our team is organizing branded assets, we're looking for that same kind of accountability, shareability, and be actionable. Take in the data and be actionable with it.
The brand is the voice of the leader. The brand is the voice that gives us something to shoot for. It articulates the vision that we're aiming for, and it gives us the tools that we can use as an organization to actually create followership.
Right.
To attract those volunteers.
Right. Not unpromises instead of, that's what I term it, right? Because brands make promises every day. And when they're not kept, the effect of that. You just brought it up with using, Mercedes and BMW in communications. But if they're unpromises. Okay, last topic I want to talk to you about, and that is this idea of agility.
Yeah.
With all the things we've been through with, from pandemic or just up and down in the economy, we are seeing in the brand world when it comes to customer service, because we're writing mission statements inside mission statements. Not only does the brand have a mission statement, but the customer service people have another mission statement that lives inside that mission statement. And oftentimes that mission statement is democratized, defined, and voiced by one group, those customers, right? The customer. And what we're finding in the landscape of today is there's one word that is the new service, and HR has already picked up on this, and that's this word of agility as a service.
Right.
Agility, right? And I was thinking about this driving to the studio today and you coming on the show, and what does agility mean? How powerful is agility for a leader?
Right. I think over the last maybe 15 years, we've been learning what the hell agility really means.
And how to live it.
Yeah. And so what I would do is I would suggest to people, think first about not just the goal, agility, but think about your goal. So we believe, we approach these kinds of questions using this statement. Whatever is born for growth. So if I'm thinking about being a servant leader,
I like that.
I want to serve your growth and my growth. I know that I can sell you something and you can buy something and we can both be elevated. I can become a growth multiplier, not a zero-sum game player.
A taker.
Where I take from you, you lose and I gain. There's a winner, there's a loser, there's somebody who lives and someone who dies, right? So if the idea is to deliver and to deliver growth to someone else and create it for myself, now let's think about agility.
Yes.
What's required? What does agility do? Well, we also believe universally that growth is the mastery of change. Think about any growth curve that you see with the jagged line, hopefully, going up, but it can go down.
Not always.
When you're growing, you're demonstrating your mastery of change. When you're going down, when you're declining, you're growing. That you're demonstrating that you've got something to learn. So the point is, if growth is a mastery of change, agility is the key to delivering that mastery to your organization. So now you have to understand, how do I deliver agility to my organization? We have something called the Growth Multiplier Index. It's a very simple 10-minute questionnaire that everyone in the organization will take, and it will show you how diverse the performance mindset is of the people on your team. It wouldn't surprise you to know that small companies tend to hire people, tend to have leaders who hire people just like them. So you don't have a level of diversity.
There's not a lot of multiplication.
Right, baby. You don't have diversity in the performance mindset, right? This is a different kind of diversity. Performance mindset that we approach problems with. The more diverse the performance mindset's represented by the people on your team, the more agile your team is, because the more likely that team can adjust to the changes the market presents to you. If you think and operate one way, then you're only going to be successful when the market and the economy line up in a certain way.
And as you know, we have both been serving clients professionally through this, through COVID. And I am proud to say that most of our portfolio has done a wonderful job with not just their leadership, but their brand in the word that I think is overused in my business, pivoting. It's not that. They're smart and agile and they know who they are. And it's okay to nuance the brand and the message for the future, whatever that is, because guess what's most important to them? The customer. And they know the customer still loves them and they still love the customer. So they want to multiply, to your point.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for coming to the studio today and being on. We're definitely going to have you back and talk about various other subjects. But thank you again for stopping by and sharing your insights, which are always wonderful for me personally and professionally. And I appreciate you.
Thank you
very much.